Welcome to our webinar series, Spotlight on Structured Literacy. My name is Lama Farhan, and I serve on the IDA Georgia Board of Directors, and I'm the chair of the webinar committee. On behalf of the boards of both IDA and the Reading League Georgia, we are pleased to be offering this webinar series for the 5th year. IDA and the Reading League are committed to providing information on evidence-based practices to educators, parents, and advocates. In doing so, we hope all students will have access to structured literacy instruction. In this 5-part series, our speakers draw on the science of reading and the science of teaching of reading. In tonight's webinar, Dr. Amy Elleman will explore how language processes such as vocabulary, syntax, and inference-making work together to support listening and reading comprehension. She will review key research in comprehension and discuss instructional practices that help students connect ideas, fill in gaps, and construct meaning across contexts. Participants will gain research-based insights and classroom-ready strategies for fostering language development and strengthening comprehension skills across grade levels. Before we begin, thank you to those who submitted questions when you registered for this webinar. As a reminder, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. The chat will be monitored this evening by Elizabeth Hogan, President of the Reading League Georgia. During the Q&A, our speaker will address as many of your questions as time allows. And now I'll turn it over to Jen to introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Lama. I'm Jen Birch. I'm delighted to introduce our speaker for tonight's webinar, Dr. Amy Elleman. Dr. Elleman is a professor of literacy studies and the director of the Literacy Studies PhD program at Middle Tennessee State University. And I've had the distinct pleasure of having Dr. Elleman as one of my professors as part of this fabulous PhD program. A little bit about her background. She earned her bachelor's in psychology from the University of Maryland in Heidelberg, Germany, and her PhD in special education from Vanderbilt. Her research focuses on key factors in reading comprehension, including vocabulary, inference generation, and knowledge acquisition. She's an expert in meta-analysis and evaluating reading comprehension interventions. As a former teacher and administrator, she is dedicated to translating literacy research into practical tools for educators. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Amy Elleman.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you so much for having me tonight. And I also want to thank the participants for sending in those questions. The questions were excellent and really helped me to think about some topics that I don't know that we have translated well. So hopefully tonight I can add some clarification or some extra questions back at you, and hopefully I'll have some answers for you. I realized as I started creating this PowerPoint that we're covering a lot of ground tonight. So I guess put your seatbelts on. We're going to go pretty fast through this. And, I'm always open to follow up. I'll be glad to share the slides and discuss, anything to do with reading comprehension afterwards. So first, I really want to get you guys in there, and I want you to look at this text. Well, these two texts. So text A, I want you to tell me how difficult you think this text is compared to text B. So which one is more difficult and why is it more difficult? So take just a couple of minutes to go through, and this will ground us in thinking about how do we teach comprehension? What parts do we need to teach, and why do we teach it the way we do? So go ahead and throw that in the chat when you get a chance. Yep, text B is definitely more difficult. Why? There we go. Yes. You see that the sentences are more complex? Absolutely. Yes, there's text A is more concrete. Syntax, vocabulary, absolutely. There's a lot more information in text B, more technical terms. Yes, yes, vocabulary. And vocabulary is going to stand out. I've done this with multiple texts, both narrative and expository. And absolutely what you see is first is sentence length and vocabulary. And we know that those have a lot of impact in comprehension. And we need to think about how do we get students from reading and understanding text A to reading and understanding text B? And by the end of, about 10th grade, we want them reading that text B. Text A, we'd say probably is around a 5th grade level. So tonight we're going to go through and figure out, we're going to decompose some of these, pieces, these processes that students need to engage with text in a certain way to make sense of it. Right. And to do that, we're going to talk about current issues and models of comprehension. Then we're going to talk about those key components. And I got a lot of questions about, what are the strategies that I can use in the classroom? This is where we're going to go over those. And we're going to do that in vocabulary, syntax. We're going to talk about referential cohesion and why syntax is important there. And then inference. And then I'll have some resources for you as well. A little bit about me. These are my kids when they were young. I have a junior in college now, and the older one already has her master's degree. So this is when they were younger. One of the pictures we're reading, they're at the London at the National Library there. My newest addition to the family is Arthur. He's usually here with me for these events. But how did I get started in all of this? I started off in the Department of Defense. My husband was in the military. We moved to Germany, and they have excellent schools. And I get to learn for 2 years from really the best of the best while I was getting my degree at the University of Maryland. From there, I came back to the States and I got a job in a middle school. And in my first class, I met a young man named Clifton. And Clifton was like, he had the singing voice of an angel. And he's just like the kind of kid that you want to take home, And Clifton could only read his name. He was in 7th grade, and I was not prepared. I had no idea what to do. And I'm going to date myself, but this was in the 90s. So I had to start off at the parent-teacher store. I had to go to libraries and use CD-ROMs and try to find research. And I found Marilyn Adams' book and realized, okay, I think phonics is what, after 3 months of trying to figure out what he needed, I think he needs, explicit systematic phonics. And so I created essentially my own program. We started working. And I still look back and I think, by the end of that year, Clifton was probably at a 1st grade, moving into a 2nd grade level, which was great progress for him. But I often wonder what would have happened if I had hit the ground running, knowing what to do. And I hear this story across, this different states. I hear this story often that teachers, walk in not prepared. So I've really dedicated, what I do to translating to doing, good research and then getting it into teachers' hands so that they can work with students like Clifton. I then went from there, came to Nashville, and I started at a school that was a school for students who had been zero tolerance, that had committed zero tolerance actions and had to be in a self-contained school. And so in that, I learned a lot, certainly about behavior management. But what I also noticed is that the students had difficulty with reading. And I could help them at this point somewhat with the foundational skills. I had that now. I understood that at least to some degree. And then I realized that I didn't know what to do for comprehension. Students would read something they wouldn't know. They'd read it, I'd ask a question, and they get the wrong answer, or they'd say, I don't know. And I didn't know how to help them because I didn't know where things were going wrong. So I went back to school and did my master's at Vanderbilt. And then I ended up in the PhD program because I absolutely loved research and realized how important it was to do this translational work of translating that research to practice. So that's how I'm in my current position. I work as the director of the Literacy Studies program, PhD program at MTSU. And that allows me to make a difference in making sure we have leaders out there who are training teachers and who are in classrooms and, who are coaches who are able to make sure that the next generation of teachers is able to help students like Clifton. So that's my story, and why I do what I do. So first, let's talk about those current issues and models of comprehension. What is reading comprehension? I love the RAND report. It's an older report, but I still think it is worth your time. So this was done in around the early 2000s, but this is their definition. Reading comprehension is the process of simultaneously extracting and constructing meaning through the interaction and involvement with written language. And that process piece is really important, and I want to talk a little bit more about that in a bit. This all takes place, reading comprehension, in this complex. We all know how complex it is, right? And I really love the DEAR model by Young-Suk Kim. This is the direct and indirect effects model of reading because it really does capture a lot of the pieces that we don't talk about as a whole. But if you look at this, I love this little structure makes so much sense. On one side, you can see the word reading. If we're looking at the simple view, we've got word reading and we've got listening comprehension on the other side. And as a foundation, we have these domain general cognitive skills and executive function. Like those are going to, make the difference across the board in both of these areas. And then on the left-hand side, you can see we have those emergent literacy skills that are so important. And you can see that there's still a connection over here with morphology in these higher order cognition regulation skills and foundational language skills. All of that is going to support listening comprehension and word reading, leading to text fluency. And then ultimately, we've got reading comprehension at the top. So I wanted to break this down just a little bit more because I realized which was one of the questions was so excellent because it had me thinking for a couple of days, where's the mismatch in the understanding between, I think, different researchers and educators too. And so I realized that I think breaking this down in its component parts could be useful. So we have language, we have the word recognition. So we're going to leave that over to the side, of course, extremely important and absolutely needed. But then we got the language comprehension piece and, the reading comprehension piece. And we see reading comprehension as an outcome here. I also wanted to say, as I started to do this, keep in mind, this is my favorite Voltaire quote, language is very difficult to put into words. And you'll see that as we start, but I'm going to attempt it. So we have language comprehension on one side times knowledge on another. And that's going to equal, I believe, the outcome of reading comprehension, what we're looking for. But what is that language comprehension? And this is where I think there may be a mismatch. And when we're talking about reading comprehension, when I'm talking about reading comprehension, I'm usually talking about the process of reading comprehension, not the product. And I think a lot of times that educators are thinking about the product, which is really important. But when I talk about reading comprehension, I'm talking about the process of comprehension, which is this language comprehension piece. And of course, we have to have knowledge if we're going to get to that reading on the other side, that reading comprehension outcome. And so I tried to break this down a bit to conceptually think about, well, how do these interact with one another? And on this side, you see these language comprehension skills. We have linguistic skills that are necessary. We have metacognitive and regulation skills. This is a big one for students who have specific comprehension deficits or DLD, as well as the linguistic piece. And then we also have a reasoning piece that we don't talk a lot about, but it's really important in processing text. And then, of course, we've got the knowledge piece. We can't do this without knowledge. So we need vocabulary, linguistic structures, content knowledge, and disciplinary knowledge to get there. And that's what we're going to put together and ultimately come up with these reading comprehension products. Now, of course, it gets even more complex. And this is the RAND group as well, because not only are we talking about what the reader comes to the table with, but we have the text changing, becoming more complex over time. We also have the activities, the lessons that we're giving, but also the tasks that we're asking students to do. Comprehending from multiple choice task is different than comprehending and writing an essay or writing a blog about something that you've read. So this matters as well. So those things need to be taken into account as well. And the other way to think about this is we talk about language comprehension skills and knowledge and how, what's more important. That's, a lot of people, we're going to talk later about this strategies versus knowledge debate. And when we look at on the side of, the comprehension skills, if you have strong language comprehension skills in these three categories, then you're likely going to pick up knowledge and be able to get knowledge. You don't need as much knowledge if you have strong skills over here, because you'll gain those through the process of reading and then being able to engage these skills. And on the other hand, if you have, weaker skills in these areas, then having stronger knowledge can definitely support you. And it acts as a support for you if you don't have that. So it's not that one or the other is more important. It's in which cases is it most important in the context you're working in and under the conditions that we just talked about with different texts and different activities, because it could change in that way as well. So when we go back to these texts and we look at which is more complex, we can see those pieces coming out that we need to address, and why, text B is going to be more difficult. That sentence length, if you have working memory issues, right? Constraints, that's going to be more difficult for you. If you have the linguistic piece, you're missing vocabulary knowledge, that's going to be difficult for you. On the other hand, though, if you have really good background about Henrietta Leavitt, you would actually then be able to you would be able to get through it, because that would support you even if you didn't have all of the pieces, the comprehension skills. Here is if you're wondering, the estimated lexiles. The average length, you can see, is way different, where working memory is going to come into play here. The vocabulary, I'll mention that, a high frequency concrete in the first text, abstract and domain specific in the second. The cohesion and reference, and we're going to talk more about that later, but that also differs, being explicit and local in one case, and then having these implicit links, which that's the part that our students usually need help with, are those implicit links between ideas and sentences. And then the concept density. Not only we have sentence length, but those longer sentences have multiple ideas per sentence, making it more difficult to read that and comprehend it. So let's talk about vocabulary first. There's a very strong relationship between vocabulary and comprehension, such that many cognitive scientists would say that this might be the same concept, that we really can't differentiate these very well. And why are they so related? And it could be for various reasons that we have this strong relationship. One could be that you have vocabulary, so you know the vocabulary words, that's going to equal better comprehension. It's very straightforward. So that could be the case. But it could also be that you have really strong verbal abilities, and that means that you're able to get more vocabulary, and you know more vocabulary, and you're also able to comprehend better. So that these things are co-varying together. They're That's the actual relationship, is that you have strong verbal abilities, and therefore you have both of these. You can do this well. And then another hypothesis is that knowledge really drives this relationship between vocabulary and comprehension. That you have, here's an example I like to use, that you've got all this knowledge, and when we test vocabulary, we see a tip of the iceberg, but there's a whole network of knowledge that vocabulary, and so we're really, when we think it's comprehension, it's not that you knew more vocabulary, it's that you had stronger knowledge in the area that actually led to that comprehension. Here's an example of one of the kinds of networks that we could imagine. These words are related to one another in text. So we have allusion being connected to impression or myth or artificial. And then we have this more dense network here about allusion. But I like to think of, it's not just a single entry, a single word that we know, but we have a whole complex. We likely know a lot of knowledge under that is really going to support our comprehension. Unfortunately, we have vast individual differences when students come into school. We have students that can be lag 2 years behind the average students in their class and 4 years behind students in the upper quartile. We also have large individual differences in independent reading, which that's where we're going to get our vocabulary, is through reading, right? So there are about 88,000 word families in printed school English, and that's debated, but I do like Nagy and Stahl-Nagy's work. Children learn about 1,000 to 3,000 words per year. That's 10 to 15 per day. I'll let that sink in, because I did not believe that. That's what actually spurred me to do a meta-analysis in this area, because I was like, children can't be learning that, because I know I couldn't teach that many words explicitly. But what happens is that we actually start to learn pieces and parts of words over time, and we start to make connections that we aren't even aware of. And as we do that, we exponentially can grow our lexicons that way, which was really interesting to learn about in school. And so it's really important that we have kids reading and being exposed to rare words. This is an example of the differences when you see adult speech. In Sesame Street here, you get a 2.0 rare words per 1,000 that you're being exposed to. Adult speech is 17.3. We get to children's books, and that's almost double what we can get from adult speech. So it's really important that we're getting kids, whether it's through read alouds, whether it's through listening to text or reading that text, they have to be exposed to text to really grow their vocabulary. Like I said, I didn't really believe that children were, that children's books, I'm like, really? 30.9 compared to, I think that back then, I thought, gosh, certainly I talk with more sophisticated language or words than cartoons or children's books. But then this was when my little one I was going to school while she was very little, and we were reading things like Llama Llama Red Pajama, and you see words like tune, fret, whimpers, moan, tizzy, and I'm like, oh no, I don't use those words in everyday language. I probably need to do more of that, and I did intentionally with both of my kids, but before that point, I didn't know that. But that is how we are able to acquire more vocabulary. So it's not just about explicit instruction, which I will give you strategies to do that with today, but it's also making sure that we're having kids exposed to text on a daily basis. Before we talk about the next piece, those of you who are familiar with meta-analysis, great. You can tune me out for the next couple of minutes, but those of you who aren't, I want to make sure that you understand the numbers that I'm going to show you. So meta-analysis is a compilation of multiple studies, and we look across samples, across methods, across all these studies to really discern, what is the effectiveness of the programs we're looking at. And so one way to determine, how large, what's the extent of the effectiveness from the treatment group and the control group? Like, how can we compare them? And we can put we can put all of the measures in a metric called an effect size. And so when we get an effect size, I call this dancing with effect sizes, and I'm thinking of this from a researcher's viewpoint. So if you get a small effect of about a 0.2 or a 0.3, it's still meaningful and something that people need to know about. So I'm dancing in my office because I can probably get it published. It didn't, we at least discovered something that works, and that's good. If we get that moderate effect size, that 0.5 or so, we really need to be out in the street telling people about it. And if we see something at a 0.8 or above, I always say be real critical of that. Like, what was the treatment and what was the measure? Because that's a large effect size. So if we see that, it's something that we really need to do with kids for sure. If it's a valid study and it has good measures, we definitely want to do that. So this was one of my first projects when I was in school, because I really started to think about vocabulary and how important it was. And I'm like, so, how do we know what to teach? What should we be teaching? And what we see is that if you give kids a standard, you teach them vocabulary, you give them a standardized measure of reading comprehension that doesn't contain the words that are on there, you see this very small effect size of 0.1. So we wouldn't be dancing much for that because there isn't much there. However, when we get to custom measures, so these are measures that are designed, they have the words that have been taught to the kids. And we see a much larger effect size of a 0.5 across students. So we should really be doing this. We're dancing in the street. Then we get to kids that have no reading difficulties. So I wanted to disaggregate because I really, I'm still focused on, well, what about the kids with reading difficulties? How does it impact them? And if you don't have reading difficulties, then you get a 0.39. So we're almost dancing in the street, still something we need to do. But then look at what happens. If you have reading difficulties, it's really important. We get a 1.23 effect size when you're working with students who have reading difficulties. They absolutely need access through vocabulary to understand what they're reading. Now, given that, we know that about 5 to some studies now have come out with, around the same amount, but 5 minutes is spent with vocabulary. It's so important, especially for kids with reading difficulties, yet we're only spending 5 minutes of our time with it. And most of that is through definitions, having kids do definitions and through worksheets. And those aren't the most effective ways that we could teach vocabulary. So what are those effective ways? At level 1, and I really love Stahl and Nagy is one of my favorite oldies but goodies. I really like having frameworks because this stuff is so complex. I think thinking in terms of how to set up a classroom or your instruction, I think it's helpful to think about what's most important and what do I need to prioritize. And at level 1, we really need a language-rich environment. We need to encourage wide reading. We need discussion and conversation around text, and we need read alouds. That's should be the core of what we're doing. Now, with kids who have reading difficulties, level 2 and level 3 also need to be very strong. We need to teach kids how to use independent word learning strategies, how to use context clues for meaning, not for decoding, but for meaning. We need to use morphemic analysis. We need to teach that explicitly and have them be able to apply it in text that they're reading. And then at level 3, we need direct instruction of those key content terms and that general high utility vocabulary. So I'm going to give you an example from each level that you could employ in your classroom. One thing that kids really like are daily idioms. They love, the cat has got your tongue there. And this really helps for MLLs as well because they need these explicitly taught because there isn't usually enough context to figure out what that means. So We want to promote that word consciousness and generalization, doing things like a word wizard chart where kids come in and they're like, oh, we learned this word in class and I used it outside of class. Or they just bring in really cool words to share with the class and put that on a board. That's great too. Cartoons often have a lot of really good language, a lot of good vocabulary that you could do daily with kids as well. I like the word power made easy. The vocabulary cartoons are fun in that, but you can see, do you ever have the feeling of impending doom? So we've got impending doom there that we can talk about, and we can do it in a fun way. Fun idioms, these are great. Kids love them, and Reading Rockets has a great article on that, and kids like it, but it's really important, especially for second language learners. They absolutely need these taught explicitly. Wordplay books are helpful. Even for older kids, these can be fun. So this is another area. These are what I call signal words. Teaching these types of conjunctions can be important, and we're going to talk a little bit later too about referential cohesion. These can help with both referential and deep cohesion. Understanding that, and it also helps with writing. So teaching explicitly the meanings of these words, especially for kids who have reading difficulties, who have reading comprehension difficulties, and students, MLLs also. This is great to know, like that they can categorize and understand how these function words work. At level 2, we have context clues for vocabulary. So this is the signal words. So not only do you want to, it doesn't help to just teach these out of context. We need to have text that they're reading, that they're able to apply these skills in authentic text while they're processing the text. So chunking the text, finding those examples, and then teaching those explicitly is very helpful for kids. Having an independent word learning routine for vocabulary can also be useful when we're talking about morphemic analysis. So teaching the kids to look outside the word for context clues in nearby words and sentences, to look inside the word parts, prefixes, roots, and suffixes. Next, to reread the entire section, keeping the meaningful words in mind, and then making an inference. What do you think the word might mean? Because it's really, this is that independent word learning piece of the pyramid that is going to be really important, because there's no way that you can teach all of the vocabulary that kids are going to need to know. So they have to have these skills to be able to independently do them themselves. I'm going to go through those, how you do it, but I will be glad to send the routine to you. This is another area that I think is really important, is that we teach morphemic analysis skills explicitly. And these are the affixes here that are most common, that are very important to teach. And I think I see more of this happening now in classrooms than I ever have before, which I really love. I also think it's important. So we spend a lot of time on the affixes, prefixes and suffixes, which is important, but we also need to think about the root words. We've got to teach that explicitly. So how do we do that with all of the words that are out there? I really like the academic word list. So this contains 570 word families that are good to teach, and they're listed in order of when students will likely gain them across time. So I think that if there was a list, if I were in the classroom right now, this would be my go-to list for teaching those morphemic analysis skills and for teaching vocabulary, because you can see if you teach abandon, you get all of these. You get abandon, abandoning, abandonment, and abandons, right? You can see how many words. Well, what I think has been done in vocabulary instruction in the past is that we think about single entries and just teaching kids in isolation. And what we need is to think about words in a network that we're teaching, either a network that has to do with the knowledge surrounding them or has to do like here, where we see that we're getting multiple entries, right? Instead of we're teaching one root, but we get more bang for our buck if we teach a root and all of the pieces that come with it. These are some great resources for that. I also like to use semantic gradients. So this is a great example that actually, yes, we're learning about the precise meaning of this word. In this case, we have vault, and but really it's about the discussion that kids have around the words so that they understand it precisely, but they also understand how words work together, how they're different, how they're alike, how to differentiate, and which words to use in their writing. So this can be very useful. So here you see hop, leap, pounce, spring, and then we put them in order. And every time I do this activity, if I'm in a workshop, and we're actually doing the activities, I always have a different answer than everyone else, but they're not wrong. But it's the discussion where we start to think about, well, how is pounce different than spring? And that discussion and conversation is really important for kids. That's the way I did it, but people always disagree with that. Also using another way to think about words in a semantic gradient and learning a group of words together are these categorical inferences and semantic gradients. So for instance, here are words about feelings, and we can put angry to serene in order and think about, was angry go on the end, or is there something wrathful might go on the end? And having kids work through this, they learn a lot of words that mean the same thing, but have these slight differences. And this will help, like I said, with both reading and writing. Another example, this was the most effective, or they had the largest effects in our meta-analysis. And this is a semantic feature analysis. These are hard to develop, but once you develop them, they're very powerful and very useful. This is an example from Henry and Mudge. Henry is picking out a Henry is picking out a dog for the first time. And so the words that we're talking about are pointed, floppy, hefty, miniature. Those are words we'd like the kids to learn from this activity. It's also activating prior knowledge so we can understand, what do they know about dogs and this process that Henry's going through. So the way you do it is you come up with the categories, and then the kids go through and they work in groups. Usually we have them work in groups, and they put a plus if they think Chihuahuas have pointed ears, or a minus, or a question mark. And then they learn. You've activated their curiosity. As they're reading, they'll learn, hopefully, whether a Chihuahua has pointed ears. Actually, they have both. I didn't know that until I started looking it up. So that was, this can be fun for adults too. I will say, the older kids, it really helps you to know what their background knowledge is in something, because they start asking questions like, what do you mean by internment? So for instance, in the book thief, you have people that the book, that come up in the story. So Jews, people with disabilities, Nazis, Hitler Youth, the Gestapo. And then across the top, you have things that happen. So understanding what they know and what what vocabulary they need can be very useful for prepping them. And then also through the book that they have a framework to, oh, wait a second, I had that wrong. The Gestapo are actually these people, for instance. So level 3, we're back at, we're getting to the precision. This is one of the strategies that I have to just tell you about, because it works so well. Like, it has really good evidence and it works well. It is a single entry. So it's not one of my go-tos unless I need kids to learn quite a few words. Or they're having trouble learning a word. This can be useful. So it the example is eradicate. It means to remove completely and permanently, to exterminate. So it sounds like a rat, a crate. So you've got to come up with a word that sounds that way. And it's always helpful to have something funny in the story. I don't know how funny this one is, but this is an example that has been used in the past. So your house is infested with rats, so you call an exterminator. He puts a bunch of crates all over the house. No poison or traps, just crates. He explains that the rats love the crates, but will only go in if they each have their own crate. A rat, a crate. If you have a rat, I'll bring a crate. Then I'll come and take them away, all away forever. And this is you can learn words very quickly using this technique. Here's an example, another example, hairsuit. Hairy sounds like a hairy suit. So you imagine a man named Harry in a gorilla suit. Aloof, same thing. It sounds like a roof. You imagine someone sitting on the top of a house, refusing to look down. Aloof, a roof. So these are very useful, especially if you have kids that are working on SAT or ACT words. This can be very useful because they can learn words quickly in a short period of time. But again, if you have words that kids are having trouble they're having trouble learning them. We did this with 7th graders and found that they learned the words. Like, I think their scores were going from like knowing 25% of the words to knowing almost 100% of the words within a couple of days. And not really, we would spend 20 minutes on Monday, maybe 10 minutes on Wednesday, and then they took the test on Friday. And this was the best way we found to get them, or one of the best ways to get them to learn the words that we were working on for that week. Another, I think, really important piece to think about, and this literature is growing more and more. We're learning more about this. But this was a great study by Hadley in 2018, and they looked at preschoolers. And they were like, okay, let's do what we typically do with preschoolers, which is like a themed approach, right? But let's go a little bit deeper and really see if giving them structure, if the kids understand the structures of where the words belong, will they actually grow their vocabulary at a higher rate? And they did. So they had read alouds from text sets, and then the kids they played with. They also had were playing with. So they had some tactile pieces too in this, but they read aloud, and then with the first encounter, they gave a brief definition or a synonym. And then they talked about the taxonomy membership, that a radish is a vegetable, and where it doesn't belong, a radish doesn't have seeds, so it's not a fruit. And those perceptual features, that a radish is red and spicy tasting, and that it's a root. And then the functional uses, how people use it. So giving them this sense of where it belonged in, this hierarchy, right, allowed them to bring more words into their network than when they just had, basic theme and a group of words together. And more work is being done here, but I think this is an exciting new area to explore when we're thinking about vocabulary. So these are categorical inferences, so very much like the semantic gradient, but it's got this inference component to it. So this is actually what category fits all of these words: leap, spring, pounce, hop, vault. Oh, there are ways to jump. So we're getting to those inference. And not only are we, thinking about words in a network that mean similar things, but we're also asking the kids to infer, well, what are we talking about here? So that helps with those inferential processes. I think of all the things that I've learned in vocabulary, I really think we need to push. First, we just need to do more of it. Kids need more exposure. They need more conversations with words, and we need to do more of it. But I also think we need to think about those semantic networks when we're teaching so that we get the most bang for our buck. Freddie Hebert has a great book on vocabulary. She has a number of books, but this one's really good. And on her site, and I'll give that to you later. She has all of these categories so that you can start to work with kids. Either they can keep a journal or you can keep it on the wall, for all of these categories of words so that they have these words at their fingertips. When they come across them, you put them on the board on the, so that that sad, you have, I think I have some examples here. Oh, did I take them? Oh, there they are. So yelled, you could have howl, screech, squeak, squawk. All of these things mean yelled. So when I'm writing, I don't have to use the word yelled. I have all of these words now in my repertoire. So, just keeping categories of, actions in this case, or categories of emotions, so that kids are keeping track of that. And then they see these as a group. That will help them remember the words, but also it will help them in their writing. A lot of you, I think, have probably been familiar with selecting vocabulary using the tiered approach. And these are great books by Beck and McCowan. So at tier 1, you have those most familiar words. Tier 2, these are across the curriculum. They're high utility words and important. That's where we want to spend a lot of our time for most of our kids. And then tier 3, we have those rare words, and they're often specific to the content that we're using. The only issues with this is when you're working with students who English isn't their first language, then tier 1 words, you may absolutely have to teach, and you should teach those. And in tier 3, for content vocabulary, we need to teach those in those content areas. But tier 2, if we've got to focus, these are really important across the board. So I have my own, I'm going to take you through how I select vocabulary when I create a program. And I think it's something to think about when you're considering putting together a unit. That, do I first want to focus on comprehension, or do I want to focus on vocabulary? Because these are two different goals. Because as you saw with the earlier text, and this is with every text, that there's a ton of vocabulary and there's not enough time to teach all of the vocabulary. So I want to kind of go through how I've done it now using AI. I've been very happy that I can now do what it took me, I don't know, weeks before to do, because I'd have to look up a lot of words and a lot of information in different places. Now AI allows us to go in and find the right words pretty quickly. So I'm going to go through that process with you, and I actually will give you the prompts if you are interested in doing it yourself. So there are 4 things that I think when you're choosing words you need to think about. One is centrality. How important is it that the reader know these words to understand the passage? Not all words are needed to understand the passage. So we want to concentrate. If reading comprehension is the end goal for this lesson, which it should be for any lesson, but if that's really the focus, then we want to make sure that we get the essential words. And maybe we don't have time for the other words. Maybe we do. And this is how I decide about those other words. So, well, almost. First, let's talk about Goldilocks words. So making sure that the words are that the students don't know the words. I've often been in classrooms where teachers are presenting words that kids already know. And, it's hard when you have a whole group. So I understand that's really difficult. But what we want is we want that sweet spot where the words are new to the majority of the kids. So we need ones that are not too easy and not too hard. And we're going to base that on word rarity. How rare are the words in the English language? High utility, just like those tier 2 words, those are important. We want to highlight those whenever we can. And then we also want to give kids time for those practice opportunities. So we should be teaching them independent word learning strategies like morphemic analysis and use of context clues for semantics. So if we're going to do that, we have to have them doing it in authentic text at some point. And so when we see that, we want to highlight that word as well so that they can practice that skill. Here's an example of The Last Conquista. Great book. You can see we've got words like unshakable. We've got gravity shell here, eerie, mumbles. We've got a number of great words that we could choose from. Thrusters, like there's a ton of words here. So how do we pick those? Well, first we go with that centrality piece. And we ask AI which words are central to understanding the meaning of the passage. And it will tell you there are 10 words that are most important. Okay. Out of those 10 words, and it'll tell you why they're central to meaning, which is pretty cool. Setting, action, mood and tone, characters, experience. It's going to even tell you why. And I didn't prompt for that. It did that automatically. But then I'm going to say, okay, now I need to know out of those words which ones I should teach. And that's where we get to the Goldilocks piece. And I say, list the words from least to rare, and then rank the central words by frequency in English using the COCA database. Once it does that, I get chaos, and numb, jolt. These are fairly easy words for kids. Gravity shell and exosphere are very specific. Okay, so it's really important then that I probably want to teach, if I was, looking at this, I might teach jolt through maybe unlatch, and I might just give a synonym for thrusters or pre-teach that very quickly so that they know what we're talking about. But I don't necessarily need to spend a lot of time with with the easy words or with the really hard words, because I've only got so much time. So I want to know what are the most important words I need to spend time with. So those common words, this is what I just talked about. Maybe the rare and technical words are not as important in this moment. So you just give them the synonym for those and you don't spend as much time with them. So let's talk about older kids and some of the evidence-based programs for those kids. This is a review that we did in LSHSS, and I'd be glad to send that to you too if you're interested. But here are some of the recommendations that we came up with after this review. Is that we need to teach vocabulary intentionally. We need to teach independent word learning strategies, focus on developing those semantic networks, increase opportunities to use new words in discussion and writing, and we need to provide that motivating and language-rich environment. Programs that did that well and got effects were the PACT program with Sharon Vaughn, word generation with Catherine Snow, McCowan, the RAVE program, the Alias program with Lasso also had great effects. Okay, those are the main programs that are out there. Now I want to talk a little bit about dictionaries, just because this is always my be careful of dictionaries. Often that when you use a dictionary, the definition has words in it that are too difficult for the kids to understand what the word means. So what I tend to do, and now it's great because we have the technology to do it, have the kids really focus on the thesaurus part of the dictionary. So when they look up something, have them go to the thesaurus first, because they're going to get a whole network of words that mean the same thing, right? And then they can figure out, oh, I do know these words. So now this makes sense. Then they can read the definition, and they can also then, of course, listen to the audio to know how it's said, which is also going to help them to embed that meaning and that word in their mind. This is something that I found that's fun. And so if you like technology and showing things in a different way to the kids, this could be useful for you. This has got a lot of linguistics pieces. So this is jolt, the word jolt. And then you see that it gives you all this information, noun, verb, adjective, adverb. And then you've got these connections that it makes as well. So that is fun. I also like the word sift. This is fun. This is The Giver. This is an excerpt from The Giver. And what it does is it gives you this nice word cloud, but it also gives you word count, character counts, lexical density, the number of unique words. It just gives you a lot of information. So if you're a linguistics nerd, you might enjoy this. Um, what I really like is that it gives you that academic word list that I talked about earlier. It's going to tell you there are 3 words: community, precise, and perceive. So I know that those are going to be in that Goldilocks range. So these are 3 words that will be really important across time for kids. But it also gives you the science words, how many science words, if you want to focus on that, language arts, and social studies. So I think that this is a really neat feature as well. This is another that will also give you rare to common. So Jonas is the rare word, and then like is the most common word. So I think when a lot of questions came through asking, how do we do this with students with learning differences and MLLs? And the key here is that it's going to be, you need to, be intentional, be explicit, just more explicit, more intentional, more explicit. And the top 2 levels, actually, all 3 levels are just expanded because you just need to do more of it. But for MLLs, you really need to be looking at allowing them to have conversations and encouraging conversations about books and about words. That's going to be really important. You want to give them as much time to have those conversations as possible. And then you also want to think about their, if you can, their language of origin and how those fit, especially, in languages that we have some morphemes that are the same, like making those connections explicitly is going to be very helpful for those students. All right. So now we are at referential cohesion and syntax. We are, let's see. Elizabeth, are you
I am here. I do
okay?
not want to be the bad guy because people are loving every minute of all of your resources. I do just want to say, and I'm going to give you like 3, 4 more minutes to wrap up because you have answered so
Okay.
many questions as well. So we're good there. But I want everyone to know that you have been so generous and said that you will allow us to send out your slides. And that's what I know everyone, even me knowing that, is sitting here writing everything down and taking screenshots. So I just want to say that to all of our participants that you are so generous in letting us have a copy of your slides. And I think once everyone knows that, we'll all rest a little easier.
Yes, and I'll be glad to send you any of the articles or anything that I've mentioned. That as I started to go through the questions, I realized that you wanted more of some things, so I added so much more, knowing that we probably wouldn't get through everything. So let me go through. I'll try to highlight like the main strategies for syntax, and then we'll just briefly touch on inference.
Awesome.
Okay, thanks. Sorry.
You're great.
All right, we're going to talk about referential cohesion, which is really the extent to which ideas are connected and overlap in sentences. And this is really important to comprehension. This is cometrics. It shows here. You can see referential cohesion is going to be really important, and syntax plays a big part of that. The barriers that we have when we come to text for referential cohesion are sentence length, word order. Passive construction is way more difficult, for instance. Not knowing US reference in pronouns or synonyms, vocabulary, and figurative language. We are publishing a syntax, a meta-analysis that was done on the impact of syntax on comprehension. What we find is that syntax, actually, if you teach syntax, you get good syntax outcomes, but it also seems to affect sentence comprehension and passage level comprehension, which we didn't have a meta that had looked at that in quite some time. So syntax, word order, obviously the cat chased the dog is different than the dog chased the cat. So having kids work using simple sentences and then moving to more complex ones for younger kids or kids who have DLD or language issues. Cutting up words and having them in different order and thinking about having them talk about how the meaning changes. This can be really fun too because it's funny a lot of times. Same thing, have students write. You can use chunking activities, getting it down to those bite-sized pieces and connecting each piece can be useful when you have very long sentences and you have to decompose them. Right. One of the, what we know the most about in syntax work is the use of sentence combining. So sentence combining is we just have the most research done on it. So teaching kids how to take simple sentences and make them into more complex sentences is very useful for syntax outcomes and sentence level comprehension. All right, these are a reference. We already talked about that. Figurative language, having ChatGPT is great at finding those pieces. We've already talked a little bit about this, but for MLLs, we want to make sure that we pre-teach vocabulary and figurative language, that we teach sentence structures explicitly for them, use sentence combining and unpacking to help them when they're in comprehension activities, build syntax through talking. First, we want to make sure we're talking and discussing and understanding before we ask them to do tasks. Link that syntax to comprehension, show that explicitly. And we want to leverage students' home languages to support that transfer. All right. The last thing I'm going to talk about is we're going to talk about just for a minute, because this was the big question that was so good. Fact or fiction? Focusing on building knowledge is more beneficial for students with reading difficulties than teaching reading comprehension strategies. Is that fact or fiction? Anybody want to put that out there? Okay, I'm going to tell you, it's fiction. We need both. What we find is even when kids, poor comprehenders, have the knowledge, we have studies that show they don't activate and use that knowledge. So they're unable to take it and integrate it. And that's what strategy instruction helps us to do. It helps to teach them how to activate that knowledge, combine it, construct meaning, and then have that comprehension outcome. So again, we talked about we need both of these. We need to teach explicitly these language comprehension skills, and we need to teach the knowledge pieces. And the way that I think about this, we have lots of studies. We have so many studies that show that strategy instruction is effective, especially for struggling readers. Like we have the most knowledge we have in reading comprehension is on strategy instruction, actually. So having knowledge is absolutely important. Like we don't want to teach things out of context, but we want to make sure that we're also teaching those supporting strategies that is going to help kids make meaning with text. Just having more knowledge and being exposed to that. First, we can't teach all the knowledge that's there. Kids will encounter, stories and texts that they don't have the background knowledge to support. All of us do. When I read medical text, I have to use my linguistic skills to understand that text. So here are some of those strategies. Inference is an important strategy as well. And I will be glad to send this to you. And I have resources at the end that that you guys can use. Where are my resources? I have lots of resources at the end for any of this information. Nope. These are the extra slides in case anybody asked a question. There we are. Last slide. Thank you. And I'm so sorry we didn't get to all the inference.
No, Dr. Elleman, this was so amazing. The chat is blowing up with people just saying, thank you, thank you. And as I see you scroll through the 170 plus slides, we are very excited to get all of this amazing material. This has been so great. And it shows how it's important for our participants to ask their questions because we do read them and you read all of them. And so you really did cover the questions that so many asked. And I can tell when we see your slides, we're probably going to get more of those answers, especially the ones around inferencing. So we're just so grateful on behalf of IDA Georgia and the Reading League Georgia. We're so grateful that you kicked off our Spotlight on Structured Literacy webinar series. It was amazing. You're getting a lot of applause. Can you see all of that?
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for having me. And like I said, all of this is available. And if you have any questions, please reach out.
Yes, well, we can tell you are very generous with your materials and your resources, and we appreciate that. And like I said, even though I know we're getting it, I was still writing everything down and have copious notes, but we're just really appreciative and hope that you'll come back because you obviously have a lot more to share with us, and we want to hear it. No one has left this, even though it ended at 8 o'clock. Everyone is still sitting here. So we appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
To all of our participants, I just want to remind you that this was the kickoff to our Spotlight series. And one great thing, Dr. Elleman, is that the next speaker in our series is Nancy Eberhardt, a friend and an amazing researcher. And she's going to cover so much about that syntax part as well. So we're so excited. If you have not registered for the February 11th next webinar in our series, please do that at the IDA Georgia or TRL Georgia websites, social media links. We will post it all. It's probably already there. Register so you can hear more about the syntax component that Dr. Elleman referenced from Nancy Eberhardt. We can't wait for that. Also, if you have colleagues that missed tonight's webinar, all registrants will receive a link to the webinar so they can watch it. Obviously, if they didn't watch it live, they can watch the recording and the slides from the presentation. Yay, the thing we all want. So you'll also have an opportunity to fill out a knowledge check or request a certificate of attendance after you view the webinar here live tonight or the recorded webinar. And that form will be emailed to you early next week, and you'll have approximately 1 week to submit that form. So once you fill out the form, you'll receive your certificate of attendance the day after the deadline for submission. On behalf of the IDA Georgia Board and the TRL Georgia Board, we appreciate you for attending this webinar tonight. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Elleman, for kicking off our series. We hope that all of you have a wonderful rest of the week and evening, and we'll see you in February.